Your translator is lying. He just sold you out. I leaned in close to the CEO, my voice a low rasp against the backdrop of clinking crystal and the hum of the Mediterranean. We were on the polished teak deck of a 300-foot superyacht anchored off Monaco, surrounded by the scent of salt air and perfume. I'd spent 48 hours hauling a vintage shipment of Kentucky bourbon from Antwerp, driving like a man possessed to ensure this Gala didn't run dry of the boss's American gold. But as I poured his glass, I caught a jagged edge in the translator's German, a deliberate twist of a contract clause that wasn't a mistake, it was a heist. The music died in my ears, and the look of pure homicidal rage on the translator's face told me I'd just stepped into a high-stakes war zone without a vest. Exposing a betrayal in a room full of sharks means you're the next meal on the menu unless you've got the receipts to back it up. You're watching Highway Stories Untold. When the world turns a blind eye to the truth, strong souls like you step up. Drop your experiences in the comments if you've ever had to protect someone from a lie. And if you want, tell us about it and inspire the fight. The Sovereign Star was less of a boat and more of a floating palace, a gleaming white fortress of excess that sat heavy in the dark waters of the Monte Carlo Bay. I felt out of place the moment I stepped onto the gangway. I was wearing a black waiter's vest over a crisp white shirt, a temporary disguise suggested by the yacht's head of security, an old contact named Miller, who I'd served with in the 10th Mountain Division. He needed someone he could trust to oversee the delivery of the whiskey, 100 cases of 1954 reserve that were worth more than the rig I used to haul them. "Just keep your head down, Jack," Miller had told me earlier that evening, his eyes scanning the pier. "These people play for keeps. You deliver the crates, you help with the service at the VIP table to keep an eye on the inventory, and you get paid. Simple. But nothing is ever simple when there's that much money on the table." The man of the hour was Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Apex Global. He was a silver-haired shark with a reputation for being ruthless in the boardroom and generous with his enemy's blood. He was currently in the middle of a massive acquisition of a German tech conglomerate. Sitting to his right was Dr. Klaus Hauer, the representative for the German firm, and between them sat the bridge, a man named Stefan, a translator with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I was stationed at the edge of their private alcove on the upper deck. The whiskey I'd hauled was being poured into crystal decanters. I moved with a practiced, quiet efficiency, my trucker's eyes, trained to spot a loose strap or a shifting load at 60 miles an hour, taking in every detail of the table. I saw the way Stefan's hands drifted toward a leather-bound folder whenever Hauer spoke. I saw the way he leaned in, his voice a low, soothing purr that didn't match the sharp, aggressive tone of the German doctor. Sterling didn't speak a word of German. He relied entirely on Stefan to navigate the intricate legalities of the merger. Hauer leaned forward, speaking rapidly in a dialect that was thick with the technical jargon of Frankfurt's banking district. "Doctor, Hauer says," Stefan began, turning to Sterling with a polished grin, "that they are prepared to waive the secondary audit requirements. They trust your vision, Marcus. They want the deal signed tonight so we can celebrate." I froze, the heavy glass decanter in my hand suddenly feeling like a weapon. I'd spent 3 years stationed in Stuttgart during my time in the service, and I'd spent another 6 months hauling specialized machinery through the Ruhr Valley. I understood every word Hauer had just said, and he hadn't said anything about waiving audits. Hauer had actually said, "We cannot proceed without the secondary audit of the offshore holdings, as the liability of the debt is too high. If you do not agree to this, the merger is void under the terms we discussed yesterday." Stefan was doing more than just translating. He was actively steering Sterling into a trap. By telling Sterling the audits were waived, he was encouraging him to sign a contract that likely contained hidden debt obligations that would gut Apex Global from the inside out. It was a scorched earth play, and Stefan was the matchlight. I saw the gold pen in Sterling's hand. He looked satisfied, his ego fed by the idea that he'd bullied the Germans into submission. "Good," Sterling grunted. Tell him I appreciate his pragmatism. Let's get the signatures and move on to the party. This was the point of no return. I could stay quiet, finish my shift and take Miller's check, or I could do what my gut was screaming at me to do. I stepped forward, pretending to top off Sterling's glass. As the amber liquid swirled in the crystal, I leaned down, my shoulder blocking Stefan's view for a split second. "Your translator is lying," I said, my voice a low, steady rumble that only Sterling could hear. "He just sold you out." Howard didn't waive the audits. He said they're mandatory because of the debt. If you sign that, you're buying a ghost ship. Sterling's hand didn't move. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the contract. But I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten until it looked like it might snap. The air around the table suddenly felt cold, despite the Mediterranean heat. "Excuse me?" Stefan asked, his voice rising in pitch. He'd caught the change in the atmosphere. "Marcus, is there a problem with the service?" Sterling slowly turned his head. He didn't look at Stefan. He looked at me. His eyes were like flint. "You're the driver," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm the man who knows the difference between waived and mandatory, Mr. Sterling," I replied, standing straight and meeting his gaze. Stefan scrambled, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "Marcus, this waiter is clearly confused. He probably picked up some slang in a bar. Dr. Howard, please, let us continue." "Shut up, Stefan," Sterling said. It was a quiet command, the kind that usually precedes a storm. He looked at Dr. Hauer and spoke in English, his voice dripping with sudden suspicion. "Klaus, the audits, yes or no?" Hauer looked confused, but he recognized the word audit. He nodded vigorously. "Ja, obligatorisch, mandatory. We must have them." The silence that followed was deafening. The irreversible change had happened. The lie was exposed, the trust was shattered, and the man who had built a career on being the smartest person in the room realized he'd almost been played for a fool by his own employee. Stefan's eyes darted toward the exit of the alcove, but I shifted my weight, subtly blocking the path. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was looking for a way to flip the narrative, to discredit the trucker in a vest. "Marcus, you can't believe him," Stefan hissed, his composure finally fracturing. "This man is a laborer. He's trying to disrupt the deal for his own reasons. Maybe he's working for your competitors." Sterling didn't answer him. Instead, he stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. He reached out and grabbed the contract, ripping it down the middle with a slow, deliberate motion. Then he looked at me. "You said he sold me out," Sterling said. "How?" I reached into the inner pocket of my vest. I hadn't just come to the table to pour drinks. Miller had given me a heads up that Stefan had been meeting with a known corporate saboteur in a cafe in the marina earlier that morning. I'd snapped a few photos with my phone before I'd even unloaded the whiskey, thinking it was just security protocol. Now, it was the smoking gun. I laid my phone on the table. The screen showed Stefan sitting with a man Sterling clearly recognized, a rival CEO from a firm that had been trying to hostilely take over Apex for years. The rage I'd seen in Sterling's eyes earlier wasn't just corporate frustration. It was the kind of anger that comes from a deep, personal betrayal. He looked at Stefan, and for a moment I thought he was going to throw the man overboard right there. "Get him out of my sight," Sterling whispered. Two of Miller's security team appeared like shadows from the periphery. They grabbed Stefan by the arms, but as they started to lead him away, the translator did something I didn't expect. He didn't beg. He laughed. "It doesn't matter, Marcus," Stefan spat, looking back over his shoulder. "The transfer was initiated the moment you opened that folder. The digital signature was embedded. You're already hemorrhaging capital, and your driver here just made sure you won't have a partner to help you stop the bleed." He looked at me with a gaze that promised a slow death. "I hope the tip was worth it, trucker, because you just sank this ship." The translator's laughter was a cold, jagged sound that didn't belong on a vessel dedicated to luxury. As the security guards began to haul Stefan toward the lower decks, Sterling stood frozen, his eyes glued to the tablet I'd placed on the table. The digital signature he'd mentioned, the ghost in the machine, was already doing its work. I've seen men realize they've walked into an ambush before, usually in dusty valleys, where the air smells of cordite and diesel. But the look on Sterling's face was the same. It was the realization that the ground he thought was solid was actually a trapdoor. "Miller!" Sterling barked, his voice cracking like a whip over the sound of the nearby string quartet. My old friend appeared instantly, his hand resting near his holster. "Sir, get this man to the communications suite," Sterling said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "And get my tech team on the line from New York. If Stefan is telling the truth, we're losing millions every second." I didn't move. My trucker instincts were screaming at me. When a load shifts in the trailer, you don't just keep driving and hope for the best. You pull over and secure the straps. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice low and steady, "your tech team is 5,000 miles away. By the time they log in, the money will be moved through 3 different shell corporations in the time it takes to blink. You need someone on this boat who knows how Stefan thinks." Sterling looked at me, his eyes searching mine. He saw the grey in my beard and the lack of fear in my expression. He saw a man who had survived things far worse than a corporate raid. "And you think that's you, Mercer? You're a driver." "I was a major in military intelligence before I ever sat in a long-haul cab," I reminded him. "I spent my career tracking insurgent funding through the very same dark web channels your translator is using right now. He's not just a linguist, he's a digital ghost. And he's still on this boat." Sterling didn't hesitate this time. "Take him, whatever he needs." Miller led me toward the stern, weaving through the clusters of confused socialites who were starting to realize the party was over. We reached a heavy, soundproof door that led to the yacht's nerve center. Inside, the room was filled with flickering monitors and the hum of high-end servers. Stefan was there, handcuffed to a bolted-down chair, a smear of blood on his lip where he'd clearly resisted Miller's men. "You're wasting your time," Stefan sneered as I walked in. "The script is automated. Once the signature was validated by the German servers, the liquidation process began. It's a cascading failure. You can't stop it from a boat." I pulled up a chair and sat directly across from him, ignoring the screens for a moment. I've learned that in any high-stakes situation, the tech is just a tool. The person behind it is the vulnerability. Stefan was arrogant. He thought he was the only person in the room with an IQ over 100. That was his first mistake. "You're right," I said, leaning back. "I can't stop the liquidation from here, but I can change the destination." Stefan's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about? You used a redirected IP through a server in Frankfurt to make it look like the Germans were the ones pulling the plug, didn't you?" I asked. I started typing, my fingers familiar with the rhythm of a keyboard from 1,000 nights spent filing reports in the dark. "But you didn't account for the fact that the Sovereign Star uses a satellite uplink with a rolling encryption key. To bridge the gap, you had to use a local bypass, a physical hardware key." I reached over and tapped the small silver USB drive still sticking into the side of the main terminal. Stefan's eyes went wide. "That's a proprietary bridge," I continued. "And because you're still physically connected to this network, the firewall you built is actually a two-way street. You opened the door to let the money out, Stefan, but you left it open for me to see where it's going." The room was silent, save for the frantic clicking of my keys. I wasn't just looking for the money, I was looking for the receipts that would prove this wasn't just a corporate hit, but a coordinated criminal conspiracy. I found a hidden directory, encrypted with a cipher that was amateurish by military standards. It took me 3 minutes to crack it. Inside were the communications between Stefan and the rival CEO I'd photographed him with earlier. They weren't just talking about the merger. They were talking about the systematic dismantling of Apex Global, how they were going to frame Sterling for embezzlement to cover their tracks. It was a complete character assassination, designed to leave Sterling in a prison cell while they picked the bones of his company clean. "You're a dead man, Mercer," Stefan whispered, his voice trembling now. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. These people, they don't just sue you, they erase you." "I've been erased before," I said, not looking up. "It's surprisingly peaceful. But right now, I'm more interested in this wire transfer to a S. Varga in the Caymans. Is that your real name, Stefan? Or just another layer of the lie?" I hit the enter key with a finality that echoed in the small room. On the main monitor, the red transfer in progress bar froze. I hadn't stopped it. I'd diverted it into a secure escrow account held by the International Maritime Bureau. It was the digital equivalent of pulling the emergency brake on a runaway freight train. The money was safe, but more importantly, it was flagged. The moment anyone tried to touch it, the authorities would be notified. Sterling walked into the room just as the screen turned green. He looked at the data, then at the cowering man in the chair. The rage was still there, but it had cooled into something much more dangerous, a calculated intent. "He was going to frame you for embezzlement, Mr. Sterling," I said, stepping away from the console. "The evidence is all there. Every email, every bank account, every lie he told tonight." Sterling looked at Stefan, who was now deathly silent. Then he looked at me. "I don't know many truck drivers who can do what you just did, Mercer." "The road gives you a lot of time to think," I replied, "and my past gave me the tools to handle the trash I find along the way." Suddenly the yacht lurched. It wasn't the swell of the sea, it was the unmistakable vibration of the engines roaring to life. Miller's radio crackled. "Miller, we've got a problem. 2 blacked-out ribs are approaching from the starboard side. They aren't local police. They're armed." Stefan started to laugh again, a high-pitched, manic sound. "Did you really think they'd let you walk away with the evidence? They're coming for the drive, Marcus, and they aren't here to negotiate." I looked at Sterling, then at Miller. The early loss of control had arrived. We were on a multi-million-dollar target in the middle of the ocean, and the wolves were at the door. I reached down and grabbed the silver USB drive, tucking it into the heavy pocket of my vest. "Miller," I said, my voice hardening, "tell your men to get the guests to the lower decks and kill the lights. Mr. Sterling, you need to get to the panic room." "I'm not hiding on my own ship," Sterling growled. "You are tonight," I told him, stepping into his space. "Because right now you aren't a CEO, you're a witness, and I'm the only one who knows how to get this evidence to the mainland." The first shot rang out, a sharp crack that shattered a window on the upper deck. The gala was over. The fight for the truth had just begun. The second shot didn't hit anything but the heavy oak paneling of the communications suite, but the sound of it changed the molecular structure of the room. It wasn't a warning, it was a liquidation. Stefan, still cuffed to the chair, let out a jagged, hysterical laugh that died in his throat when Miller's hand found the back of his neck, forcing his head down. "Move!" Miller shouted over the ringing in our ears. We didn't head for the panic room. I knew how these offshore extraction teams worked. If they couldn't get what they wanted through a digital back door, they'd burn the whole house down to ensure the evidence turned to ash. A panic room on a sinking or burning ship is just a high-end coffin. I grabbed Sterling by the shoulder, a move that would have gotten anyone else fired or tackled. But right then, he saw the major, not the driver. "The tender garage," I said. "Miller, take Stefan. He's our insurance. If they sink this boat, they lose their prize and their payout. They need him alive to unlock the secondary encryptions." We moved through the service corridors, the narrow arteries of the ship where the mahogany and silk gave way to cold steel and fluorescent humming. Above us, the sounds of chaos were muffled but distinct, screaming guests, the heavy thud of combat boots on the deck, and the occasional burst of suppressed gunfire. Sterling was breathing hard, the reality of his world collapsing around him, finally catching up to his heart rate. "They're going to kill us all for a thumb drive," Sterling hissed, his face pale in the emergency lighting. "They're going to try," I corrected him, "but they're operating on a clock." Monaco's Coast Guard is elite, and they're already scrambled because of the shots fired. These guys have maybe 6 minutes before they have to vanish. We reach the garage, a cavernous space at the water level where 2 high-speed tenders and a pair of jet skis were docked. The smell of diesel and sea salt was thick here. Miller threw Stefan into the back of the primary tender, a sleek, blacked-out carbon fiber craft that looked like it belonged in a stealth movie. "Jack, look," Miller whispered, pointing to the closed bay door. On the external monitors, we could see the 2 black ribs, rigid inflatable boats, circling the Sovereign Star like vultures. They had boarded from the bow and stern simultaneously. They were professional, moving with a synchronized lethality that told me these weren't just hired thugs. They were sanitizers. "I'll draw them off," Miller said, reaching for a crate of emergency flares. "I can trigger the fire suppression system on the main deck. It'll dump a cloud of CO2 and foam. In the dark, they won't be able to see their own hands." "No," I said, my mind already calculating the weight and speed of the tender. "If you stay, you're dead. We go together." We use the whiskey. Sterling looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "The bourbon. Jack, that's $2 million of history." "It's also 80-proof accelerant," I said. I looked at the 2 crates I'd hauled onto the boat myself, still sitting on a pallet near the loading ramp. "Miller, get the tender's engine hot, Mr. Sterling. Get in and stay low." I moved with the kind of economy of motion you only learn when a mistake means a multi-ton load crushing your chest. I cracked open the crates, the smell of aged oak and corn mash filling the garage. I didn't pour it out. I rigged the bottles into the fuel intake of an old decommissioned jet ski sitting in the corner, bypassing the tank. Then I set the throttle to wide open and tied it off with a piece of nylon cord. I looked at Stefan. He was watching me, his eyes wide with a dawning realization. He knew what happened when high-proof alcohol hit a hot manifold. "You're insane," Stefan whispered. "You'll blow the whole bay." "Then you'd better start praying the seal on that tender is as good as the brochure says," I told him. I hit the button to open the hydraulic bay doors. As the heavy steel plate began to descend, light from the moon and the surrounding yachts spilled in. One of the ribs was sitting right there, waiting. A man in a tactical mask leveled a submachine gun at us. I pulled the cord on the jet ski. The machine roared to life, screaming in protest as the vintage bourbon hit the cylinders. It didn't just move, it launched. I shoved it out the open bay door, a screaming, flaming ghost of Kentucky history. It didn't hit the rib. It didn't have to. The moment it hit the salt water, the unstable fuel mixture and the heat caused a massive backfire, followed by a localized explosion that sent a wall of fire and white smoke 20 feet into the air. "Go!" I yelled. Miller slammed the tender into gear. We roared out of the garage, the carbon fiber hull slicing through the water. The explosion had created a literal smokescreen. The men on the rib were blinded, their night vision goggles blooming white from the flare of the burning bourbon. We were past them before they could even find the trigger, but we weren't clear. The second rib was already banking, its engines howling as it picked up our wake. They were faster than us, and they had the angle. "They're gaining!" Sterling shouted, clutching the side of the seat. I looked back. The man in the bow of the pursuing boat was steadying a weapon, not a rifle this time, but something larger, a magnetic harpoon or a disabling cable. If they fouled our props, we were sitting ducks in the middle of the dark Mediterranean. "Miller, zigzag," I commanded. "Don't let him get a lock." I crawled to the back of the tender, near where Stefan was huddled. I grabbed a heavy emergency wrench from the toolkit. I wasn't looking to fight the boat. I was looking for the receipts again. I reached into my vest and pulled out the USB drive I'd taken from the server room. "You want this?" I yelled over the roar of the wind, holding the drive up so the pursuers could see it in the moonlight. "Come and get it!" I didn't throw it. I tucked it back into my pocket and grabbed Stefan by the collar of his expensive shirt, hauling him up so his face was visible to the men in the rib. "They won't shoot as long as he's in the line of fire," I told Miller. "He's the only one who can verify the transfer destination." It was a bluff. I didn't know if they cared about Stefan at all, but in the world of shadows, everyone is a commodity. The man with the launcher hesitated. That second of doubt was all we needed. The lights of the Monaco harbour were getting closer, but so was the rib. We were in a dead heat, a high-speed chase through a minefield of anchored yachts and mooring buoys. The irreversible change was now a physical reality. We couldn't go back to the Sovereign Star, and the mainland was a fortress we hadn't reached yet. Then I saw it. A heavy chain-link barrier used to mark the entrance to the inner racing circuit harbour. It was submerged just enough to be invisible to someone who didn't know these waters. "Miller! Hard port at the red buoy! Now!" Miller pulled the wheel. The tender leaned so hard the rail dipped into the water. The pursuing rib, intent on the kill, didn't see the buoy. They didn't see the chain. The sound was like a freight train hitting a wall. The rib hit the cable at 40 knots. It didn't just stop. It disintegrated. The boat flipped, engines screaming as they tore themselves out of the transom, and the occupants were launched into the dark water like stones from a sling. We slowed down as we entered the calm water of the inner quay. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the panting of 4 men who had just cheated death. Sterling sat back, his tuxedo ruined, his empire shaken, but his life intact. He looked at the burning wreckage of the rib in the distance, then back at me. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had just seen the truth of the world. "The drive," Sterling said, extending a hand. "I need to get it to the authorities." I looked at the drive in my hand. Then I looked at the dark windows of the hotels lining the shore. I knew how this worked. If I gave him the drive now, it might disappear into a settlement. The men who tried to kill us would be buried in paperwork, and the truth would be managed. "Not yet," I said, sliding the drive back into my vest. "There's one more stop we need to make, and this time we're doing it in front of everyone." We didn't head for a police station. In a place like Monaco, the police are efficient, but they are also deeply entwined with the very people who occupy the VIP boxes at the Grand Prix. If I handed that drive over to a desk sergeant, it would be lost or corrupted before the sun touched the Mediterranean. No, I knew where we had to go. The Monte Carlo casino was hosting the post-gala after-party, and the world's financial press was currently lined up on the red carpet like a firing squad. "You're going to walk into the Lion's Den?" Sterling asked, his voice trembling as we stepped off the tender onto a private stone jetty. "They'll have security everywhere." "Security is for keeping people out, Mr. Sterling," I said, checking the weight of the drive in my pocket. "They aren't prepared for the truth coming out of the dark. Miller, keep Stefan in the car. If I'm not out in 10 minutes, take him to the American consulate in Marseille. Don't stop for anything." I didn't look like a waiter anymore. My white shirt was stained with grease and salt spray, and the sleeves were rolled up over forearms that had spent decades wrestling steering wheels and heavy machinery. I walked toward the side entrance of the casino with a steady, undeniable pace. When the 2 suited guards at the door stepped forward to block me, I didn't slow down. I just looked them in the eye with the cold, flat stare of a man who had seen much worse than a flashlight and a radio. "Marcus Sterling is behind me," I said, my voice carrying that gravelly authority. "And he's about to make a statement that's going to move the global markets. You can either be the guys who helped him or the guys who tried to stop the news. Choose fast." They hesitated. In that second of doubt, I was past them. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of gold leaf and heavy chandeliers. At the center of the room, standing on a small dais, was the man I'd seen in the photo on Stefan's phone, Vanderbilt, the CEO of the rival firm. He was holding a glass of champagne, holding court with a group of reporters, likely preparing to leak the news of Apex Global's collapse. I didn't wait for an introduction. I walked straight to the tech booth at the back of the hall, where a young technician was managing the live feed for the event's monitors. "Move," I said. "Hey, you can't be here." I didn't hurt him. I just leaned over, my shadow swallowing his workspace, and plugged the silver USB drive into the main terminal. This is a matter of international fraud. If you touch that mouse, you're an accessory. The screens that had been displaying the Apex Link merger logo suddenly flickered. I'd set the script to auto-run. The first thing that popped up wasn't a spreadsheet. It was the recording of Stefan's translation on the yacht. Audio I'd captured on my phone's memo app, overlaid with the actual German contract text I'd pulled from the server. Then came the emails, the bridge logs, the receipts showing the kickbacks. The room went dead silent. Vanderbilt's glass hit the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds. He looked at the screen, then his eyes darted around the room, searching for the exit. But the reporters were already moving, their cameras swiveling from the stage to the giant monitors. Sterling stepped into the light then. He looked battered, but he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had been pulled back from the edge of an abyss. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at Vanderbilt. "The merger is off," Sterling's voice echoed through the hall, amplified by the house speakers. "And the only thing being liquidated tonight is your reputation, Jonathan." The public humiliation was total. In the world of high finance, a lie can be managed, but a recorded, documented betrayal is a death sentence. I watched from the shadows of the tech booth as the authorities finally arrived. Not the local beat cops, but the specialized financial crimes unit Miller had called from the boat. They didn't go for Sterling. They went for Vanderbilt. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Sterling. He looked at me for a long time, the silence between us filled with the frantic shouting of the press. "You saved more than my company tonight, Mercer," he said. "You saved those drivers. Why, you don't even know them." "I do know them," I said, thinking of Elias and the thousands of men and women currently asleep in sleeper cabs across the continent, unaware that their lives had almost been traded for a line on a ledger. "I'm one of them, and we don't like it when people mess with the load." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small brass major's coin I'd carried since the day I left the service. I placed it on the console. "The whiskey was a delivery, Mr. Sterling. The rest was just professional courtesy." I didn't wait for a thank you. I didn't wait for the reward I knew he'd offer. I walked out the back service entrance, the cool night air of Monaco hitting my face like a benediction. I had a truck waiting in the port and a road that didn't care about mergers or millions. Walking away from the glitz of Monaco, my boots finally back on the gravel of the shipping docks, I felt the familiar weight of the world settle back into place. Money like that, the kind that can buy yachts and silence, it's a different kind of heavy than a 40-ton trailer. It's a weight that rots the soul if you carry it too long. I thought about Elias, probably sitting in a dim office in Marseille right now, waiting for a call that would tell him if his life's work was still his own. I called him as the sun began to peak over the Mediterranean horizon, turning the water the color of the bourbon I'd used to light the way home. "The road's clear, Elias," I told him. He didn't ask how. He just exhaled, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that made every bruise and every bullet-shattered window worth it. "We don't do what we do for the medals or the marble halls. We do it because the truth is the only thing that keeps the wheels turning." As I climbed back into the cab of my rig, the smell of old coffee and worn leather greeted me like a brother. The world of billionaire sharks and silk ties was behind me, and ahead was nothing but the white lines and the quiet dignity of a job well done. Out here, your word is your bond, and your lights are your witness. And for tonight, that was more than enough. Standing up for what's right often means standing alone until the truth catches up. If this story reminded you that some things are worth standing up for, no matter how much time has passed, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. We're building a community here of people who believe in honor, the truth, and looking out for the person in the lane next to you. Drop a bourbon in the comments if you've ever had to protect someone from a lie. And if you want, tell us about it. It's an honor to have you riding. I'll see you on the next haul. Stay safe out there.